Thank you so much, Kristen. I can't say how happy I am to be back at this podium. It's really exciting, and I'm so happy to see so many friends here. Here's the book. It is in the bookshop. I would also like to extend my thanks to Kristen and to Paige Moreau, to Dan, who's helped with the tech support today, to the associates, senior associates, and weekend guides. And the fact that this is a fund in honor of Barbara Martin is particularly a happy thing for me because we worked together for so many wonderful years. And it also gives me the opportunity to acknowledge my colleague in interpretation, Catherine Johnson-Rohr, with whom I've been working on the labels, which I think are pretty good. And I think I want you to be aware that Catherine has been a real partner on the show the whole way through. So I hope you enjoy the labels and go back because there's a lot of words in there that you might need to read. Okay. So I am starting with a quote written by the Venetian author and poet Moderata Fonte, who was actually born with the name Modesta Pozzo, and she gets us right into ideas about women's intelligence, education, literacy, and she's also fashioning herself because her name was Modesta Pozzo, which in Italian means like a small well. So she translates that into Latin and takes on a pseudonym, Moderata Fonte, which means something more like a temperate spring. So this notion of inspiration. We heard a bit about her last week, but I just would note that she was also the author of a book about the worth of women, subtitled, Wherein It Is Clearly Revealed Their Nobility and Their Superiority to Men. And she is a real champion for the idea of women's intelligence and education. And so the quote that you see, and I've put it on your sheets so you can take it home and think about it. She says, "Gold which stays hidden in the mines is no less gold, though buried. And when it is drawn out and worked, it is just and rich and beautiful as other gold." And that was her calling for drawing forth women's intelligence through education and support. Gold is a theme that if you look closely, you will see it running throughout the show, and I'll try to give you little hints about that as we go along, but keep your eye out for the golden things here. And for me, this quote, when I saw it, really did inspire me to think about the hidden gold in our own collection. And so that's how the title of this lecture series came about, and you'll see these words, hidden gold, here and there throughout the show. And so just to give you an idea of how I was looking into the collection, you can see that there are paintings, sculpture, ceramics, textiles, including a spectacular gold-threaded velvet, books, works on paper, and even shoes, represented here by the spectacular, like, foot-tall Venetian shoes known as Chopin. This also gives you a sense of the scope of the chronological scope of the exhibition, from the painting at the upper left by Barna da Siena, which dates to around 1340, and next to it our recently acquired very small and beautiful painting by Artemisia Gentileschi, which dates to about 1630. So I believe in the long Renaissance, and those are more or less the dates as the show has been put together. The show is also inspired by a plethora of incredible, beautiful scholarship carried out over the last several decades by women and men who dig into the archives and find stories that perhaps have certainly gone untold. And so I just put up a mosaic of some of the books that have inspired me, and some of which are written by lecturers in this course, including the wonderful Sarah Ross, who spoke last week, and her book, The Birth of Feminism, was a real inspiration to me from early on, but also Jackie Musacchio from Wellesley, who'll speak to you next week. So here in Boston, we have an incredible group of scholars working in this field, and I just put these up because they're some of my favorite titles, including The Birth of Feminism, Daughters of Alchemy, Forgotten Healers, and a recent exhibition about Lavinia Fontana, Trailblazer, Rule Breaker, and a book whose title I think says a lot, Strong Voices, Weak History. And so it is our goal to really break that trend. I noticed that I actually forgot to put my own book on the further reading, so I am going to hold it up and plug for it. And in doing that, I would like to thank the miracle worker editor, Hope Stockton, who somehow got a book out of me. It was really an amazing accomplishment for her, and I hope that you will have the opportunity to have a look at the book and enjoy reading it. So I thought what I would do is sort of walk you through the show, but dig deep into a number of objects to give you a sense of how the show was put together, but also to spend a little time thinking about some of the objects. And I start with these images, which pay homage to my other partner in the show, and that is our designer, Louisa Respondek, who came up with the brilliant idea when we were talking about the show and what we thought we would try to accomplish through the design. Well, she came up, she said, well, what about the ideal city that's in Berlin? And you see that painting, which inspired Louisa in the overall design of the show. So you can see it on the plan that, sorry. Not using the pointer. At the bottom part of the plan, you can see that she designed a kind of portico space, which very much emulates the ideal city portico. And then you walk into the next space, which we're calling the forecourt, where the things are grouped around the central object of Antico's Cleopatra, the back cover, and then opens up into a larger space that actually deals with objects for interior spaces. So the most open, largest space is actually the where some of the most intimate objects are held, and we wanted to give the sense that women were not enclosed in those interior spaces, that the world opens up to them in those kinds of spaces. So just to give you a sense of when you walk in, here's the beautiful portico, and you can see how it flows very beautifully into the next section. And I wanted to call attention to start with to the two objects that fill the corner of the portico off to you. If you're looking at our text panel, which I hope you do, this is the area off to your right, and it presents two examples of works that are built around the idea of exemplary women. So Judith, the biblical heroine, and St. Catherine of Alexandria. And here, the Barna da Siena that you saw on the first slide, you see that it's the scene of the mystical marriage of St. Catherine. And she is shown in an act that is an emulation of the the ritual act of marriage in the Renaissance. She was an early Christian saint from Alexandria. She was a scholar, a princess, an orator, a martyr, and a visionary saint. She vowed to remain a virgin and would only take as her husband Jesus, basically. She has a vision of herself marrying Jesus, and so that is her vow of chastity and virginity. The fact that they stand on equal ground and that Jesus is a grown man, even in the very early iconography of this scene, and this is a very early representation of it, it's already unusual. And I show you, to make that clear, a painting that's in the Getty Museum and a detail from the painting, which shows the mystical marriage of Catherine happening, but she kind of marries the baby Jesus. But in our painting, she's standing on equal ground with the adult Jesus, and that is quite rare over the history of this image. We also have, in the lower regions, another visionary saint, and that is Saint Margaret of Antioch at the lower left. She too is a visionary saint, early Christian, visionary saint, and she has a vision of a demon coming into her room, and she beats him off. And so we have a very, very straightforward image of a very strong woman, this image of Saint Margaret beating down this demon. At the center, we have an image, another ritual image of peace in this period. You see in the foreground two men wearing very different colored clothing. They are performing the ritual legal act of peace, the kiss of peace, as the angel brings them together. They've thrown down their arms. And at the far left, you see Saint Michael repelling another demonic figure. Above the scene of the kiss of peace, we have another image of Jesus as a child, and he's standing between his mother and his grandmother, and so it's a kind of a wonderful scene of child rearing in I would say a domestic space. So you put all these things together, all these images of powerful, exemplary women, and this I think of this as almost a feminist manifesto that I nickname "Women and Angels Save the World," because these powerful images of examples of behavior and fortitude that also have some kind of civic meaning leads us to another aspect of this painting, and that is it's a very unusual painting, a very unusual format. We have no idea what its function was in its period. And that, to me, is also indicative of something very specific about women's history. It tends to get lost. And so this painting has always been the painting that I wanted to introduce the show with, for all those reasons. And just to give you I can't resist showing one of my favorite fresco paintings by the painter Masolino in San Clemente, where you see Catherine of Alexandria. So the Emperor Maxentius wants either to marry her or silence her or get her to not be Christian anymore. And he brings together a group of scholars, and Catherine is asked to speak to them with the idea that they will convince her to abandon her path. Instead, of course, she convinces them. They all convert to Christianity. Sadly, they're all martyred, but that's another part of the story. But the power of women's voices, to me, comes through so beautifully in this fresco. So we're still in the portico. If you look to the left, you will get to see some of the most important images by women artists in the show. 4 paintings in our collection. The fantastic Sofonisba Anguissola, who is the poster child for our show, the beautiful Lavinia Fontana, the 2 paintings at the top. These are all very small paintings, but very powerful paintings. And those 2 paintings have been in our collections for decades. The 2 paintings below, the Barbara Longhi Madonna and Child and the Artemisia Gentileschi, were both bought in 2022. So since I started working on this show, we've actually doubled the number of paintings by women in this period, which is quite an accomplishment. And we, like so many museums, are trying to catch up. You'll see at the bottom of the text panel an image of a woman's hand holding an engraving tool. And we decided to use that as a little key into works of art in the galleries that were made by women. And so you'll see it throughout the galleries. So I do want to spend a little time looking at the Sofonisba Anguissola because it is really one of the extraordinary objects in the show and in our collection. As you heard last week, it is a self-portrait. It's about this big. It's like looking at your phone. That's the kind of interaction you can imagine with it. It is in a 19th century setting, so that quality of it being a kind of pendant is actually a later presentation of the piece. We don't know exactly how it looked or was used in the Renaissance. And there's the slightest possibility, maybe not even a slight possibility, but a real possibility that it was actually round to begin with. But she is young. This is one of the great signatures in our collection, which encircles this very unusual shield-like object that Sofonisba holds in front of her. The inscription, the signature is in Latin, so she is demonstrating her literacy, and she's actually able to even pun in Latin. So if you read the inscription, which in translation is, Sofonisba Anguissola, the maiden, painted this with her own hand from a mirror in Cremona. So that allows us to understand that she's very young, she's still living in her father's home, and that she's still in Cremona. So we think it was painted around 1556. She's probably about 26, 27, something like that. And one of the details that I absolutely love about this inscription has to do with the artist's hand, which she refers to by her own hand. And if we look at her hands in the painting, we can appreciate that with her left thumb, she is actually covering, in the Latin word virgo, or maiden, she's covering the letters G and O. So that leaves vir, which all of you Latinists know is the root of the word man in Latin, virtue, virtuoso, virtuosity. And so hiding with her hand those 2 letters, she's actually making a kind of visual pun, because she is certainly a powerful virtuoso painter on this small scale. The cipher at the center is a wonderful Renaissance example of this kind of word game. It's kind of the Renaissance Wordle or something. It's the interlocking letters, which certainly include the letters of her father's name, but there are other letters as well, so we don't really know how many solutions to this puzzle we might find, and that's part of the game. We can't really solve this. So we know that her father supported her career. She does not take the usual path for a Renaissance artist who is a woman, typically daughters of painters or sisters or wives of painters can acquire the skills, but this does make Sofonisba exceptional. Her father is not a painter. He recognizes her talent and supports it. And so this father-daughter sense of support for women's talent is a very, very important theme if women are going to succeed in this period. She is exceptional in that way, and I want to say a very quick word about the idea of exceptionality, which I take exception to, along with a number of scholars, because if you keep saying how exceptional it is that this woman is a painter, it's a way of actually sidelining them into, that's great, but that's very unusual. The more we learn about Renaissance Italy, the more we learn that there were many more artists than we tend to think. There are many more creative women in a number of fields, and it's time to stop siloing them as exceptions. Sofonisba is exceptional because she's the daughter of someone who is not a painter, and she paints more self-portraits than anybody else in the Renaissance, and she goes off to serve the King of Spain. That's exceptional for any artist in the period, not just because she's a woman. So that's one of my little bugaboos, breaking down this idea of exceptionality. I show you here the beautiful little, again we're little, like this, painting by Lavinia Fontana. And I show it to you as it's installed in the show because it really gives you a sense, this image gives you a sense of the size of it, the unusual shape of it, and the fact that it does have not only an unusual profile, but actually it's coved. And that is because it very likely decorated perhaps a bed or a child's crib, and so it enters into the more private world of the Renaissance home. Lavinia Fontana was the daughter of a painter and the sister of painters, but exceptionally, she does take over the family workshop, and so she's the first woman in the Renaissance to run a workshop. So she has that incredible distinction. She also had 11 children, so the sense of the quietness and intimacy of this painting is really, I think as a mother, she probably appreciated the quietness that she probably longed for. But a very interesting point was made by our colleague in Dublin, who is the curator of the exhibition Lavinia Fontana, Trailblazer, Rule Breaker, to which our painting went. She tried to map when Lavinia is painting big, because she does paint big altarpieces, and when she's painting small, lining up with her pregnancies. So the small paintings might well have been literally painted while Lavinia was possibly in bed. And so I think that takes on a beautiful additional meaning when we think about this painting. I do want to show you her self-portrait, where she presents herself as a woman in her study. She's holding, again, the hand of the artist. Remember the hand of the artist for throughout the show. Just think about women's hands. And she is holding a drawing tool, and she's drawing after small-scale sculptures of nudes. And so she's also breaking that stereotype that women didn't have access to the study of the nude. They actually could draw after small-scale sculptures or large-scale sculptures, for example. Our beautiful little Artemisia Gentileschi, recent acquisition, small-scale work, probably the sleeping Christ child, but possibly a sleeping child, small again, on copper, and I think it really works beautifully with our Lavinia because it has a similar sense of intimacy and quiet, and we also know that these kinds of small-scale works on copper were sometimes given as wedding gifts, and so a very personal kind of object, possibly for a female owner, which again, with the Lavinia, we get these pictures of how women live. And finally, the lovely Barbara Longhi, which I don't know if you can see it in the slide, so your assignment is to go back to the galleries and look for the fact that this nursing mother and child, the baby turns to us and a little bit of milk escapes from his lips. And to be honest, this was not my favorite painting when we acquired it, but the fact that we can think about this moment of the Madonna nursing the child, it also reminds us that, for example, around Italy there are a number of shrines that were dedicated to the relics of the milk of the Virgin Mary, so that if in Catholic theology, Mary is assumed into heaven, so there are no body parts that can become relics. Something like her milk is something that can be a relic of the Virgin. And so that, I think, is a really interesting way of thinking about how Barbara Longhi is presenting one of the most typical images of the Renaissance, the Madonna and Child. It's also made a little more interesting by the fact that by the time, we don't have a date for it, because Barbara Longhi was painting this kind of image across her career. So I just put here today around 1600. I have no idea when it was painted. But by the end of the 16th century, we're deep into the Counter-Reformation, and Counter-Reformation writers about images actually worried about this subject because they were worried that the revealed breast of the Virgin could incite lust in men. Longhi continues to paint this subject. We know from documents that, for example, 16 of these images were commissioned, not from Barbara Longhi, but from another artist, so that every cell in a convent could have a nursing virgin. So possibly it was a convent commission, right, or a private devotional commission, probably for a woman. So that's the Barbara Longhi and some of the stories behind it. And I just show you that corner of the gallery where we have this wonderful grouping of relatively small paintings. And also, as you come around the corner, you see that there is also a small book, and that is a book by the poet Vittoria Colonna. And the label there talks about hidden gold and the women as intellects, women as writers, and we can bring to the fore, at least because we don't have an image of her in the show, Christine de Pizan, whom you heard about quite a bit last week, who wrote the Book of the City of Ladies. And it's an opportunity to talk about this idea of gold again, which we heard Moderata Fonte speak about. But Christine de Pizan, in her book on the City of Ladies, is discouraged, to say the least, by how hard it actually is as a woman to accomplish anything. And this is a dialogue, and Christine is feeling discouraged, and Lady Reason says to her, "My dear girl, what has happened to your common sense? Have you forgotten that gold proves itself in the furnace? It does not change its quality, but increases in value the more it is worked and fashioned in various ways." So this notion of gold as a kind of image of fortitude and potential for women. So here you see the frontispiece of the book by Vittoria Colonna. You're going to have a beautiful lecture about Vittoria in a few weeks, so I'm not going to say more than to say that just to call attention to its small scale. These are devotional poems by Vittoria Colonna, and she is the first poet to have a single authored book of poems published in Italy. And this is the second edition of her poems of 1542. And I love the fact that it is the small-scale Renaissance book that you could carry around with you, kind of like a paperback, so that if you wanted to have your prayer book at hand, you could. Further along, we also have a wonderful book by the lace designer and lace maker Isabella Parasole. And so it calls attention to the fact that the MFA has this incredible collection of early printed books, and we could pull out a number of really important examples. And of course, both of these are made by women. So these are part of the creative world of women beyond the paintings. I want to show you the beautiful drawing across the street at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, the very famous Michelangelo Buonarroti Pietà made for Vittoria Colonna. We know that she was his friend, and they exchanged poems. He created and sent to her this finished drawing of the Pietà. So you might be wondering, why isn't this here in the show? Well, it was a real decision not to borrow it, because I didn't want to frame her in the context of her relationship with Michelangelo and have the Michelangelo be the most famous object in the show. So I wanted to stick with her as her own creative voice, and that was as a writer. We also have a group of fantastic engravings by the engraver Diana Mantuana, also known as Diana Scultori. I chose to use Mantuana because that's the only way she signs her name. If she uses a second name, it is that Diana of Mantua. She does not sign with her family name of Scultori, but she's known by both names. We are able to put together a number of engravings by this important artist, and this is just 5 out of a larger group. She is exceptional, again, not because she's a woman, but because when she goes from Mantua, she grows up. Her father was a painter an engraver and a sculptor at the Mantuan court. She moves with her husband from Mantua to Rome, and on the lower right, you see an example of a print where she is given. You'll never see it here. You'll have to go look at it in the galleries. She attains a papal privilege, which gives her, for 10 years, rights over her prints, over her plates and the prints that come from them, so that she's the only person that can profit from her own work. That's exceptional, and it's not exceptional because she's a woman. Printmakers this does not tend to happen for printmakers. It's used more for copyright of pamphlets and books and things. So we are very lucky to have one example of a print that has that papal privilege. It's right down at the bottom when you go and look at it in the galleries. And here you see, it's so nice to see people looking at things in the galleries and reading. And I also show you the source of our little icon for works by women artists. It's the reverse of Diana Mantuana's medal, which I wish I had borrowed, actually, from the British Museum, where she is holding, so it's a woman's hand, it's the artist's hand, holding the burin with which she is engraving. If you look very closely, she's engraving the Madonna and Child. So we use that as a sign, this woman's hand holding her instrument as a sign of works by women. So these are works by women that we've been looking at now, whose names we know, but we also attach this icon to works by women whose names we will never know. So how do we know that they're by women, these objects? Well, something like this fantastic straw-encased casket decorated with cut straw. This is an art that women practiced. We can be 99% sure that the decoration on this casket was made by a woman. So we're tagging it with one of these icons. Just a word about this incredible material, which was a revelation to me. This cut straw, it looks like this wonderful golden, gilded decoration. And in fact, there is no gilding and no paint. This is the natural quality of this golden color straw, which the artist was able to burnish up to shine, and somehow, as you're burnishing it, it gives off a kind of unguent that sort of seals the gold. And so this amazing object, surviving from the late 16th century, probably from Venice, is a kind of testimony to the ingeniousness of craft in this period. And maybe, if you take it a step probably too far, women's understanding of the natural world, because this is a very humble material worked in this way to create fictive gold. And that is something that the Renaissance loved. If you can have gold, it's great. If you can mimic gold, even better. That shows your ingeniousness. So one of my favorite objects in the show. We tag all of our beautiful pieces of lace as made by women. And we know that women were the practitioners of this art form. They either learned in the home, produced them in homes. They were taught in convents to create lace. And from convents, pieces of lace were actually sold to support the convent. And by the later 15th century and into the 16th, by the later 16th century and into the 17th century, Venice, which is so famous for its great lace-making traditions, well, that tradition, that industry, was really fueled by poor women and girls who actually were, the famous island of Murano, where lace is made. They were actually in sort of factories out there, had no sense of what these works were actually being sold for, and they were basically being paid for their pay went towards supporting them in these not good conditions for female workers. So these beautiful pieces of lace can tell a wide range of stories about women's work as well. The other type of object that we tag as by women are examples of embroidery, because once again, we know that they were, these kinds of objects were being made almost exclusively by women. Sometimes they learned at home, sometimes they learned in convents. And I just wanted to share one thought by a lady that we heard about last week, Marietta, who was a writer, a poet, a scholar, an orator. Later in her life, she said that when she was in a convent for several years and learning this kind of needlework, she credited it with helping her to discipline her mind and give her thoughts a degree of focus. And she sees this kind of activity as part of that. So works by women, but also works about women. And really the earliest idea for this exhibition came to me in about 2008. Sometimes things take a long time. When I was doing a little work on the great bust of Cleopatra by the sculptor nicknamed Antico, who was the court artist to the Gonzaga court in Mantua. And so what I saw in this bust was a kind of Renaissance rethinking of a famous woman in history. And the other aspect of it, and I'll talk about that in this rethinking in a second, but the other aspect of it is that it was very, very likely commissioned by the famous Isabella d'Este, the Marchioness of Mantua. And so it also turns out that we are able to show a number of objects that are associated with Isabella and her court, including the fantastic Maiolica plate with scenes of Perseus, which was commissioned for Isabella by her daughter, Eleonora Gonzaga. So putting these two objects together, it becomes a story about the power and patronage of the Italian courts, where women really exerted high levels of power, and we heard about some of that last week. But the Cleopatra is the first object that you will see at the center of the second section beyond the portico, and she is kind of the crux of two threads that develop out from her. And I just would say a quick word about this incredible representation of a famous woman of history. For Boccaccio, for Dante, she was known for her greed and lustfulness. Dante puts her in among the lustful in the Inferno. And Boccaccio says about her, Cleopatra was an Egyptian woman who became an object of gossip for the whole world. She gained glory for almost nothing else than her beauty, while on the other hand, she became known throughout the world for her greed, cruelty, and lustfulness. So if you look at this bust, that is not what you're seeing. You're seeing a completely different interpretation of this figure of Cleopatra. And my sense is that she is, well, first of all, she's beautifully, chastely dressed. She's wearing a crown which has some pearls in it. And she's not really looking at us. She's very caught up in her own thoughts. It's an image of a woman thinking. And I believe that what she's thinking about is her dire choice to commit suicide in the face of shame, and having lost her kingdom. She's going to be taken off to Rome by Augustus Caesar and marched through the streets of Rome in a triumphal entry. And to avoid that, and this is one interpretation that is current in ancient literature but also in Renaissance literature, she chooses death over dishonor. And so you see the little snake that slithers along the base here. I think she's thinking about that act. How extraordinary to have this image of a woman thinking and taking her life literally into her own hands and making such a fateful decision. And it is not out of context with Renaissance thinking, because Baldassare Castiglione, the famous author of the Courtier, writes a poem about a sculpture in Rome that represents they believed represented Cleopatra. So he writes in the voice of that statue, and he says, whoever you are who sees this arm bitten by harsh snakes and eyes grown dim in eternal night carved in this marble, do not believe that I lay down in death unwilling. For a long time my conquerors forbade me to break off my life, doubtless so I, a captive queen, might be born in a thronging, triumphal procession. But virtue and noble desire for an honorable death overcame shameful life and the tyrant's snares, for freedom was achieved by death. And I felt no chains. I went down to the waters of the underworld, a free shade. So I believe that that's what we're seeing in our fantastic bust of Cleopatra. So from Cleopatra, if you go off to the right, you see her right, we would be going to the left, the fantastic Isabella d'Este, the plate from the Isabella d'Este service. And it gives us a little bit of an opportunity to think about some of the women of the courts of northern Italy. So you see, if you can see the arrows, they're very hard to see. Isabella d'Este is born in Ferrara, one of the great at the Este court. She marries Francesco Gonzaga of Mantua, becomes the Marchioness of Mantua, and her daughter, Eleonora Gonzaga, and we heard so much last week about these generations of women. Well, she becomes the Duchess of Urbino. So each of these women both of these women are rulers in their husbands' absences on occasion. They're patrons. They are, we know a lot about Isabella d'Este. She was a musician. She made perfume. She was really a kind of trendsetter, cultural icon among Italian women. And you see the beautiful towns of Ferrara, Urbino, and Mantua. So the great plate from the Isabella d'Este service, it was a large service, and about 24 or 25 of them exist, and we are from probably 100 plates maybe that were made originally. We are very lucky to have one of them. And I wanted to concentrate a little bit on the commission because, okay, it's Eleonora Gonzaga who commissions for her mother works in what is one of the greatest art forms in her city of Urbino. These fantastic, beautifully painted, glazed earthenware plates and platters. So Maiolica is at its height in Urbino at this moment. So that's what she chooses to send to her mother, the height of Urbino culture in the period, right? So, and at the center, you see Isabella d'Este's coat of arms. It's the impaling of Gonzaga and Este, which is also, of course, Eleonora's lineage. But for me, one of the most beautiful moments is the appearance of one of Isabella's little emblems just under the coat of arms. Do you see that beautiful little musical staff? Well, that staff, if you know music, which I don't, are rests and pauses, which essentially equals silence. And so with this blazon of political stature of the coat of arms of the family, underneath you have this little moment of quiet. And I like to think that that's Isabella not in her political or powerful moment, but when she can retire into her studiolo. She had one of the great small studies of the Renaissance, where she could withdraw to read and think and sing and play music. And so that little emblem says a lot. It was one of her favorite emblems. She actually had it embroidered into one of her most fancy gowns, where it's covered with these rests and pauses. And of course, those contradictions of her going out into society with this image of silence is quite wonderful. So the Isabella d'Este plate. If you go to the other direction, you go into a section that is a little more challenging, and it thinks about why stories of famous women are often tied up with stories of violence in this period. For example, the suicide of Cleopatra, which is on the plate on the other side of the Cleo on the niche wall. But at the center of this room, or space, or section, is a large Maiolica plate which pushes back a little on these notions of women and violence. It shows the reconciliation of the Romans and the Sabines. And this was an act of peace made by women who had been violated. We show a print of a very famous sculpture by the Medici court sculptor Gian Bologna of the rape of the Sabine. And any of you who have been to Florence will remember this spectacular marble in the main civic square of Florence. And it is a sculpture of a woman being abducted and carried away. The Sabines needed to repopulate. The Romans, this is a story that is deep in the history of the city of Rome. So the Romans need to repopulate and create families, and they abduct the Sabine women, take them, force them to marry, and have children. And instead of demanding revenge or anybody to avenge this act, the Sabine women encouraged the men of their families to establish peace. It's like, okay, this has happened, it's bad, but it's time to move on, and women are peacemakers. Sort of like the Catherine of Alexandria, right? This moment of peace. And not surprisingly, or perhaps surprisingly, when Christine de Pizan talks about this story, she doesn't mention the abduction, really. She focuses on the reconciliation, and it's an example of women as peacekeepers. And so that is what takes center stage in our installation. We go then into a section that thinks about science and sorcery and healing, because we know that women were healers, they were sometimes apothecaries, they were sometimes even physicians. And this is something that's only being recaptured at this moment, really, from archival research by people like Sharon Strokia at Johns Hopkins. She's actually at Atlanta. But she is recovering incredible information about women as healers. So how do we look at our collection and try to find ways of telling that really important story about women in the Renaissance? So this is where, as a curator, I'm practicing something that might surprise you. It's extrapolation and speculation, because we really don't have objects that directly tell this story. We don't know of any drug jars. You see that wonderful albarello that we don't know of any that actually belong to women or were used by women or were part of apothecaries' shops. So I chose that one because it has pearls, which are often associated with women, and knots, because they're often found in pattern books for embroidery. But there's no reason to believe that that was actually ever necessarily used by a woman. It might have been. It has poppy flowers in it, according to its little tag. So it was used as a sleep aid. So you could imagine it might be used in a home setting to help people sleep. The other one is the other object is this fantastic, very surprising story taken from Ovid's Metamorphoses. And if you look at this painting, it's a Maiolica dish, but to me it's a painting. It means it's so vivid as a narrative, and it's beautifully painted in glazes. So this scene, the narrative, is kind of scary. You see in the foreground a highly muscled figure holding a sword and looks like she's going to kill the gentleman who's reclining on the bench in the foreground. And at first you might not even realize that that is a female figure in the foreground, the female nude, which is highly muscled, powerful, holding a sword. And the story is actually the story of the sorceress Medea, who is here using her arcane deep wisdom for the good. So we know that Medea helped Jason as best she could to attain the famous golden fleece, right? So here, Jason has asked her to take years of his own life away and give them to his father so his father can live to enjoy their happiness and success. And Medea, a sorceress, says, well, no, I'm not going to do that. But what I will do is create a potion that will restore years of his life to him. So if you look at the figure at the top, that is also Medea. She does have a chariot that is drawn by flying dragons. And what's happening there is that she has gone off. Ovid says she travels for 9 days and 9 nights to find all the ingredients she needs to put together this potion of youth. And in the foreground, she is about to slice her father-in-law's neck, drain his blood, and fill his veins with this youth potion. And he attains 40 years more of life. So once again, Medea is doing everything she can for Jason, using her powers to the good. And other sources indicate that when people are thinking about like the arcane knowledge that women might have, maybe you should know the whole story. So maybe if you know this story, you might judge her slightly less harshly for the horrible acts that she is better known for. That is, Jason betrays her and takes another wife, and she kills their children and his new bride. So that is what she is famous for, but there is a backstory, and it's a more positive story. That is actually sometimes in the literature about other sorceresses. So the other thing to note is this image of the powerful woman as a highly muscled, masculine nude. And you know where I'm going with that, right? Because if a woman has that kind of power and knowledge, she can be intimidating and scary to society. And so she is represented less like a woman and more like a man, because she is able to take these kinds of dire actions. So from those first two sections, we go into the largest space of the galleries, which have to do with convent life, devotional life, marriage and childbirth and home life, and the kinds of things that women wore. And so these bigger spaces I find very peaceful and beautiful. I show you here my colleague George Sharoon, who's putting the final touches on the wonderful screens that we have on the table at the center of this space. Please spend some time with those, because they will allow you to turn the pages of one of the books. You can see all of the woodcuts in one of the books, and you can also listen to some music. Renaissance music has a really important role in women's lives, and we have there four pieces that are composed by women, and one that is a type of song that was commissioned and supported by Isabella d'Este. And you can also dig deep into detailed photographs of some of the splendid textiles in this show, which for me make the show. The installation and presentation of the Renaissance textiles here, I think, is it's an extraordinary opportunity. The MFA has one of the great collections of textiles in the world, and these Renaissance textiles have really not been on display very much, and so we were able to show a really wide range of textiles from the period. And it made me think that once I can take a breath, what I want to do is go and study textiles. There's so much in them. They're so wonderful. And working with my colleagues in textile conservation, the genius Meredith Montague and Jen Swope stood by our side as we were installing these things. So the curator that has that expertise. There's so much wonderful teamwork on this show, and that was a very big part of it, because installing textiles is actually terrifying. So, but the first section here, and these sections seem to all flow together, is about learning and creativity in the convents. And one of the great objects for this is this small book, which is the story of the life, the miracles and deeds of a saint, the Blessed Virgin Veronica of Binasco. And this book really tells the story of how important literacy, the ability to read and to write, really is for women in this period. Because her story is that she's from a poor farming family, and you see that at the upper left. She's refused entry to a convent because she can't teach herself how to read. So she begins to have her visions, and Mary with the baby Jesus appears to her in the countryside, says, "Don't worry about it. You're going to have everything you need. You're going to learn everything you need to learn." And she manages to go to the convent of Santa Marta in Milan, where she is taught to read and to write by Mary, angels, and Jesus himself. So she attains these vital skills, and it really tells us how important literacy is also to devotional practice, because if you can read the Gospels, you have direct access to the life of Christ, right? This is vital. She also, in the spectacular woodcut that actually appears twice in the book, she also has visions of receiving communion directly from Jesus. It's the highest grace that anyone could achieve. And so these visions of Veronica make her very famous. She's actually one of the examples of women who leave the convent and travel. She goes to Rome to visit the Pope, who declares that she's a very holy woman. And so here we see her most spectacular and important vision. So if you go and look at the screens, you'll be able to go through all of these woodcuts. And I also really love these images because they also give us a glance into what convents might have looked like. So we see Veronica's bedroom, where she's receiving a branch with which she can write from an angel. It's a gift from Mary in heaven, but also fascinating is the decoration of her bedroom. One of my favorite objects in the show is a loan of this little baby Jesus wrapped, swaddled, holding a little bird. And it's here as an example of the kind of little dolls that women sometimes were given, girls were given as they went into convents or as they were getting married. This is a very particular type of tactile, emotional, devotional object. So you could pretend to, hug the baby, dress the baby, lie the baby down, pick the baby up. And these little dolls, he's about this big, sometimes were accompanied by fantastic textiles. So this is a 14th century, and these are probably 17th century. They don't really go together, but they make the point of you might stand the baby on the pillow, you might put the cap on his head. It's kind of interactive devotion. And I just show you one example of one of these detailed images of these incredible, the incredible embroidery. The cap and the pillow we label as by women as well, because they very likely were made by women embroiderers. Again, looking for gold, you've got it here. And there's the installation of the little baby with the cap and pillow. And in case you don't believe me that this is actually sort of how this kind of image would have been used, you see this painting by Mantegna of the presentation of Jesus in the temple. You see he's swaddled, but you see he's standing on a cushion, and he's wearing a sweet cap as well. Because we have this incredible selection of books in the collection, we have an example of what was, without a doubt, the most popular devotional manual of the Middle Ages and Renaissance, the Meditations on the Life of Christ. And our book is an excerpt of that, focusing on the passion of Christ, so his suffering and death on the cross. And this kind of devotional manual goes into literally excruciating detail of Jesus on the cross and the blood that's flowing and the pain that he's feeling as a way of cueing the devotee to meditate on these moments in Christ's life. And so we have the page open to the crucifixion. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to read the 4 pages of thinking about the crucifixion in detail when you are looking at an image like this. So you have the image in your mind and the image before you, and these kinds of meditations inspire some of these images. But what I wanted to stress here is the role of the women, his mother, who suffers with him, Mary Magdalene, and the other holy women who feel and express this kind of grief, which is a very particular type of devotional practice. And I, who have worked in this field for many, many, many years, know the meditation since I was an undergraduate, did not know that the book was originally written for nuns. And there are people who think that it was actually written by a nun. It was often given to St. Bonaventure, but in fact it was written for a convent setting. I show it with a small painting that is a recovery for this show, the beautiful little crucifixion by Bernardo Daddi, which has not been on view in many, many years. Our conservator, Sarah Mastrangelo, worked on it and got it into good enough shape to be able to show in the galleries. And I think that just that beautiful scene of the women supporting the Virgin, and then this image of a woman who's on the near screen, a woman who is dressed in everyday clothes, but she does have a halo, so she could be a saint of some sort, but she's actually our entry into this devotional image. She's praying before the crucifix, and she tells us what we should be doing when we're thinking about this image, and that we should feel those emotions that Mary and her companions are feeling. So that kind of devotional imagery is very, very, this emotional, empathetic approach to devotion, very much a woman's world. We also have scenes of the Annunciation, which is actually the Annunciation repeated again and again, as if you were praying the rosary. And that is also true of these little Maiolica reliefs that are some of my favorites, which the scene of the Annunciation and the Visitation is actually the prayer of the Ave Maria. It pulls together these two scenes. So again, women are not the only ones that pray the rosary, but they do pray it in they model this kind of devotional approach where you say the prayer, but you think of the scene of the Annunciation or the Visitation. One of the important loans to the show is this image of a widow by Ludovico Carracci. We do not have an image of a widow at the MFA, so to have this fantastic painting where women are often, widows take on large degrees of responsibilities for their families, both economically and spiritually. And this image of the widow praying before a crucifix, she has a little prayer book, she has a little gathering of holy medals and tokens, and she has a rosary. So she's modeling devotion for her family. And similarly, Catherine of Alexandria is transported by prayer before the crucifix. The most important loan in the show for me is this small prayer book. It's a Hebrew prayer book from the British Library. And I was really committed to the idea of presenting the stories of Jewish women in Renaissance Italy. There were Jews in Italy in this period. And just as their Catholic counterparts often were the sort of the prayer machines of the family, we can see this wonderful image of a woman. We know who she is. We know her name because it's in the book. This is a prayer book made for Menachem ben Samuel and his daughter Maravilla, great names in the show, from 1465, made in Florence. And she is holding a cup, and the text indicates that she is performing a ritual for Havdalah, the closing of the Sabbath on Saturday night. And that book and that case takes center stage in this area about devotional practice. So to see these together really shows the role of women in this role of religious expression and ritual practice. Along with it, we have a fantastic Torah binder on loan from the Jewish Museum, which in Jewish practice, women were not, and often are still not, able to handle the Torah or read from the Torah. But in Italian Renaissance practice, women who made ornaments for the Torah were given special blessings. And so this Torah binder, one of the earliest that we know from Renaissance Italy, has a beautiful inscription which reads, "In honor of the pure Torah, my hand," remember our theme of the hand, "raised an offering. I, Honorata, wife of Samuel Foa, it is such a little one," with the Hebrew date and the date of 1582 to 83. This is extraordinary for a number of reasons. Most important, we actually know the name of a woman who was making an embroidery. None of the others in the gallery, or almost very, very, very few known, actually have women's signatures on them. So we know who made this. So she, of course, gets an icon. We know who embroidered this beautiful Torah binder. I just want to put in a plug for the future of our Judaica collection. We do have an Italian Renaissance Torah binder in the collection, and at the bottom, and it will be featured in a new gallery dedicated to Judaica that my colleague Simona Di Neppi is putting together. So it's not in the show because it's waiting to go into that gallery. I'm going to skip through this because we're late. I'm late. Just to walk you quickly through some of the other sections in the show. And one is dedicated to marriage, and you can see the beautiful portrait by Lorenzo Costa of an unknown woman, probably a young bride, and she oversees this section of the show that has to do with objects related to marriage and birth. And my colleague Jackie Mizzacchio will be talking about this aspect, so I can skip over it for you. Just give you a view of some of the spectacular textiles that might have been part of a woman's trousseau or the things that she would have in her home. And to conclude by talking very briefly about some of these wonderful objects that are what women might have been wearing. So our great chopines, which are about a foot tall, and they are not the tallest known. There are some that were about 24 inches tall that exist. This part of the installation where the chopin and other works of lace are shown together. You can see in the case closest to me a couple of those icons. So we've labeled the lace by a woman, unknown, and at the bottom, that's where the Isabella Parasole lace pattern book is. And there's our wonderful case with the chopin. We also have these fantastic ones that are also inspired by lace patterns, the little white ones, which I still don't think anybody could actually wear and walk in, but also the sort of everyday chopin at the center. And we're able to show this comparison between our high chopin and an image of a Venetian courtesan. And this gives us yet another opportunity to think about how what we know about women's lives has changed. We used to think that only courtesans wore chopin, because in prints like this, they're showing their chopin. And you can see that she's opening her skirt, showing her high chopin and her pantaloons as part of, the erotic charge of her profession, right? But people have come to understand that noblewomen also wore chopin. It's just that you couldn't see them. But what they were doing, see how very long her dress is? So the chopin allowed her to have a lot more material so that she could wear some kind of spectacular velvet or brocade like the splendid velvet in the show and just show more of it. She's like a walking advertisement of her family's wealth, because these incredible velvets are made with this kind of splendid golden thread. They're extremely expensive, more expensive than the paintings and sculptures that we've been looking at. The most expensive objects in Renaissance Italy are some of these velvets. And these are some of the details that you'd be able to see if you go visit our screens taken by Marietta. And that's how we show the book and the splendid textile, the splendid velvet in the show. And again, a plug for the screens, where you can see that the woman who made this beautiful embroidery created both the front and the back that you can't even tell the difference. So she's working front and back, almost like a goldsmith. And if you're looking for hidden gold, you can go in to these images taken with a microscope and see this beautiful golden thread that is part of this embroidery. And I would just close by saying that we know that women in convents were responsible sometimes for making this gold thread. Think about it, they're trustworthy, they're given this gold, and to create these tiny golden threads. And so even though they don't make the velvet that we just saw, they are part of that, they are part of the production of that kind of high-value Renaissance object. And here, we do completely believe that this is by a woman. And so I will leave you with one of my favorite details of this corner of the large embroidered tablecloth, just to think about finding gold and finding women's hands throughout the show. So I'll stop there because I really went a little long and I want to give you a chance to ask any questions that you might have. But please enjoy the show, and thank you for your attention.
We have some time for questions, so if you want to raise your hand high, there's a microphone on either side of the room, and we will come to you.
Hi, thank you. I've got a quick question. Lavinia Fontana had her own studio or workshop. Did women in the various areas, seek her out to learn the crafts, the various crafts that she demonstrated?
You know, I don't know that she had a workshop, a teaching workshop in that way. She inherited and ran the family workshop, but I'm not sure that she then passed that on to other young women painters. I do know that she was very, very keyed into the patronage system in Bologna, and so women came to her to commission works of art and portraits. So she was very keyed into the whole kind of network of women in Bologna of the period, but I don't know if she actually taught any other women to paint. We know that Sofonisba Anguissola did. She taught her younger sister, she taught the Queen of Spain. She was known as a teacher throughout her life, but it's a really good question, and it's something I will actually think about and see if there's any evidence that she actually taught other women to paint. It's a great question, thank you.
Hi.
Yeah.
Is it known how women made thread out of gold?
Yes, we do actually know the process. There's a kind of you have to beat it down, and it has to get down to sort of like what we would think of as aluminum foil, that you get the most out of any gold that you can. So there's this process of pressing the gold and then wrapping it very carefully around other thread to create those amazing images that you saw there. If you go look at the screens, you can see that sometimes they're flat, sometimes they're round. So we do know how it is made, and it starts with a gold coin that gets pressed down to get the very most out of each piece of gold that you have.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to know if among the women that you presented today, there were some women that were independent, and you stressed the relationship with a good father, or probably husband, better if he dies sometimes. But were women that were able to be independent and to do this work without going to a nunnery?
Yeah, I can give you a couple of examples. For example, Lavinia Fontana is running her family workshop, so she's the independent owner of that shop. But both, and I'm going to go to the writers, both Christine de Pizan and Moderato Fante earn their living through their writing. And that is true of a number of writers as well. Sofonisba supports herself supports herself and her family through her art. So yes, they do, when they can achieve this status and stature as artists, can support themselves and their families. Christina Pizan starts writing because she's a widow, she's got children, and she's got a mother to support. So that's how she supports herself and her family.
I'm interested in knowing a little bit more about the life of a curator, I guess. I wanted to know, you talked about borrowing pieces for this. So, like, how far out do you have to know, I'm going to borrow these pieces? How do you know? I mean, it just sounds super complicated. You have to figure out what you're missing, who has it.
It is super complicated. What I didn't stress I think I didn't stress the fact that, well, there are 100 objects in our show, and all but 8 of them are in our own collection. So this is a particular accomplishment for the museum, to be able to put together this kind of show, mostly from our own collection. So when I was thinking about loans, it was very specific. I wanted the widow's portrait because we don't have that. I wanted the prayer book and the Torah binder because they truly tell the story of women in Jewish women's religious practices. The little baby Jesus doll. There are just 6 real loans because 2 of those loans, including the fantastic Medea plate, is a loan from the Boston Athenaeum, but it's on loan to us since 1872. So I think of it as ours. They are very kind to let us use it as if it were ours. We have context for it. But I have to say, this show really was supposed to happen in 2020. I negotiated those loans, went to visit, talked to the people at the British Library, for example, in 2018. And they were good enough to wait for us, for the show to actually happen. But typically, you need a good 4 years to really do a big loan show, which this is not, but it still took a long time to plan and a long time to make its way into the galleries because of all of the delays due to COVID and other things. So it is a fun story. There are these wonderful stories about. I will say that the British Library in particular, they did a show on Hebrew manuscripts and they held this back for us because we had asked for it so long ago. On the other hand, something that I didn't get to talk about, the medal of the Jewish woman, Gracia Nazi, I had requested from the Jewish Museum in 2019, but since then, we actually bought our own, so I didn't have to borrow it. We bought a version for ourselves, so we just borrowed the Torah binder, which is a great loan from the Jewish Museum.
I think we'll end on that note. Thank you so much, Marietta, and thank you for coming today.